Chapter 21. Dean. Malaya looked over subconsciously and then lowered her head, the food on her plate suddenly becoming quite interesting. She hadn't eaten very much before, and yet now she was enamored enough to take 2 bites back to back. The change didn't escape Theron's notice, but he also didn't look over for more than a glance. One would have never thought he had spotted his target. Given where they were tucked into the restaurant, Sawyer and Yanoi didn't notice them either, nor did the third individual with them. This was the same trio that had been together in the tea house before. "I'm going to go to the bathroom, Malaya. I'll be right back." Malaya blinked. Right, take your time." She cleared her throat, her ears turning red again, wondering why she had told him to take his time. It wasn't as though he was a lady. Had she made it weird again? Theron slipped into the bathroom, his kind, amiable smile giving way to an indifferent placidity. The plumbing situation in high-ranking cities like this one was excellent, as was the ventilation. Private rooms upstairs all had their own bathrooms, while on the bottom floor here, everyone shared a communal bathroom. Or, rather, 2 of them. One male, the other female. All of them had the same flaw to exploit. They shared a ventilation channel. Going from one bathroom to the next through the ducts was actually quite easy. Theron went to the private stall and opened the door. His foot tapped at the toilet, and a glob of water shot out from the bowl. With a point of his fingers, he sent it into the vents. It was a common misconception that sound didn't travel well in water. In fact, it traveled far better through water, especially warm water, than it did in air. Theron snapped his fingers, and the ball of water vanished completely. Where the hell are the women? Yanoi collapsed on a couch, kicking his feet up. "Aren't you the one who said all the girls in town were boring?" "Well, aren't they? Have you seen the senior sisters at the sect? There's something about cultivation that just makes a woman." Yanoi wiped his lips before he started drooling. "Why don't you make it to Silver Mancy first? Then you can start dreaming about those senior sisters. Right now, they'd cut it off before you even knew what happened." "F you, Kai, Sawyer." "Yes, big bro." Sawyer stood to his feet. "Drinks, women, chop chop." Sawyer rolled his eyes, but obliged anyway. The standing between the two wasn't large enough for one of them to be ordered around like the other's lapdog. But for certain reasons, Sawyer chose to oblige. "Why's he like that?" Kai asked after Sawyer vanished. "The little rat needs help making up for his lost credits. Who asked him to be a fool? The thistle name is only as good as the one holding it. If he couldn't hack it, he shouldn't have pissed off the wrong person." "Didn't that teacher get canned?" "She's canned, sure. But she's already a gold mancer, and what is he? He wasn't good enough to make it into the sex, and he's doing the academic stream because he's not good enough for the military stream. If he can't even pass the academic stream, he's going to spend the rest of his life under everyone's boot. And what are we supposed to do about that? Someone may or may not have let it slip that it was possible to get extra credit by helping a sect out. Someone. Okay, maybe it was me. Kai burst out into laughter. Was it possible to get credit through the sex? Yes. But if you could do that, you could definitely get a passing score all on your own. In fact, you'd probably be well on your way to perfect credits. It was like banking on getting 3 extra credits like Theron had. If you were that excellent a student, barely graduating wouldn't even be in your cards to begin with. "Speaking of which, we still have no information," Kai asked. "Nope, they just told us to wait around here." "Don't bulls me, Thistle. You definitely know something." Yanoi chuckled. "Maybe." "Spill." "All I can say is that it's related to the new dean." "You mean your father?" "I will have to pretend I didn't hear that." Yanoi closed his eyes with a smile. "You've got to give me more than that." "I really don't know much. Just tell me what you can before the idiot comes back. If you can't figure it out with what I've already told you, maybe you and the idiot are already in cahoots." Kai threw a pillow across the room, and Yanoi laughed. Theron listened to the conversation for as long as he could. After a long while, he stood to his feet, his thoughts swirling. He was never going to try and execute a mission this important on the first night he got a chance. That was the mark of either a foolish assassin or an all-powerful one, and he was neither. After flushing the toilet, he left the stall and walked to the mirror to wash his hands. He stared at the young boy looking into his soul as he slowly pieced something together. Today, he had confirmed that Dean Vermouth had been replaced with Dean Thistle, but this Dean Thistle happened to be the father of a target of assassination. Why? And how much influence did the Thistles also have on the sect that a change to the Imperial Scholar Academy would be tied to their movements like this? Malaya implied that there would be changes soon. The military stream. Could it be related? But there was an elephant in the room. How could the Crown allow the Thistles to move so much of their weight around like this? The next day, Theron learned that change was indeed coming. From today on, graduating Imperial Scholars will be required to complete at least 11 credits of the opposite stream. Chapter 22, Fantastic. Theron sat in the midst of the class along with everyone else. Though he didn't show it, he was quite surprised by this change as well. 11 credits weren't a lot, but it depended on how you looked at it. If one considered those who were already close to graduating and suddenly had this requirement thrust on their laps, it was devastating. It was also particularly bad for those without any talent for the military stream. The military stream wasn't entirely combat. It also included commanding and military tactics. However, the academic stream covered the bulk of those classes, while the ones unique to the military stream were upper-year classes that had a laundry list of prerequisites to clear first. Teacher Burn Thistle tapped his cane on the ground twice, and the hushed murmurs came to a lulling stop. I will be taking you all to get a taste of the military stream today. Call it a field trip. Come on, up and at 'em. Theron, I'm nervous. A small voice came from Theron's side, her little hands tugging on his sleeve. Little Sadie didn't know what to do with herself. She had joined the academic stream to avoid combat, but now she was being forced into it. It'll be okay, Theron said with a smile, rubbing her head. Not every class available to you right now requires combat. There are weapon cleaning and assembly classes, movement technique classes, formation deciphering classes. It's possible to get the credits you need without fighting anyone. Sadie's eyes lit up, her pigtails bouncing. Really? Really? Theron looked up, sensing a gaze on him. Teacher Burn Thistle had sent a toothy grin his way. With a nod, Theron returned the greeting calmly. It wasn't long before the class was taken to a dusty training field. Grunts and the sound of sharpening blades swirled through the air. Compared to the prim and proper academic stream students, those in the military stream seemed much more rambunctious. Most didn't even follow proper school dress code. What kicked up these preppy boys to this neck of the woods? A young man with a belly as round and hard as a wok, and a chest that looked carved from twisting steel wires, set down a heavy stone with a bang. Theron recognized him at a glance. He was Wajan, a second-year Flux Mancer who had accumulated 19 credits. All things considered, he was ahead of schedule and well on his way to graduating. But he was also a bit of a meathead. His credits were only so low because he had barely passed his auxiliary classes. By Theron's calculations, he would have at least 24 credits if he put in a little more effort on that front. Line up. A roar came before Wajan could get his answer. In a rare showing, the military stream Imperial Scholars displayed actual discipline, rushing to their places and dropping whatever they were doing. Soon, they had lined up just like the academic stream students had. A bald man who stood 7 feet tall strolled into the dusty arena. He had a smoldering heat to him, almost as though his bronzed skin had just come fresh out of the forge. His gaze was no less intense, and Theron was fairly certain he saw some of the military stream students trembling in terror. In one moment, they were carefree and full of life, and in the next, they didn't dare to breathe too loudly. Sergeant Dulco. It was said that he didn't like being called teacher at all. When you were under his tutelage, you were already in the military. You either fell in line, or you'd be wrapped up in so many military law punishments that you'd forget which way was up and which was down. Teacher Burn Thistle walked over to the man as only an old man could, slow and laboring. After whispering something to him, Sergeant Dulcow couldn't help but frown. This was not the plan. Burn didn't reply, only giving a light smile in return. Theron couldn't hear exactly what was happening, but he read the body language quite well. He looked away, and though his expression didn't change, whatever respect he had for Sergeant Dulcow was flushed away in the same toilet he used last night. The sergeant cleared his throat. What you all might not know is that the 11 credits you must accumulate this time will be different from the norm. The point of this exchange is to ensure that both streams gain experience from the other, and as such, you cannot expect to complete the same sort of classes you would in your normal stream and make it past. Today, we will give you a taste of the military stream, a small bit of what we do every day. Sparring. Sergeant Dulcow waved a hand. Wajan. Yes, sir. The wok-bellied teen stumbled up. He couldn't have been a day over 15 years old, yet he looked like he was another year or two from 40. Maybe Sergeant Dulcow had influenced him, but his clean-shaven head certainly didn't help. You'll be our guinea pig for the day. Show the academic stream the strength of the military stream, but remember that these are your fellow classmates. Yes, sir. Wajan greedily rubbed his thick fingers together, scanning through the class of academics with a wide grin. Ha, Theron, Teacher Burn called out. These brutes seem to think that size is all that matters. Why don't you go and spar a round or two with him? Okay, Theron said calmly. He felt a strong tug at his arm. The last thing little Sadie wanted to do was let go of his hand. But Theron just reassured her with a smile and stepped out onto the field. Theron wasn't granted a weapon, and he knew it would be a waste of time to ask for one. Now he, a Water Mancer stuck in the middle of a dusty field, was somehow supposed to spar with a Flux Mancer with an iron body. A fantastic exchange, indeed. Chapter 23, Teacher Dulcow. Theron stood in silence, winds blowing across the field and kicking up dust. It was hard to tell what he was thinking as he stood there, a full head shorter than the young man across from him and 3 times narrower. At least in terms of size, it was a complete mismatch. In the crowd of academics, Sawyer sneered. It wasn't hard, even for an idiot like him, to tell why Theron was out there. What he didn't like was that the young boy had the same annoyingly calm expression. Sawyer really wanted to know just how long he could keep that up for. Wajan wasn't just a second-year Flux Mancer. He was also a 6th Resonance Bronze Mancer. That was already well ahead of schedule for his age, even in a sect, let alone here. By comparison, Theron was only in the 4th Resonance, and he was a Water Mancer to boot. If you're... A moment, please, Teacher Dulcow, Theron interrupted. The sergeant froze, and the military stream students straightened up just a little bit more. The last person to call Dulcow teacher had been made to run 100 laps around the field. That sounded like an arbitrarily high number, and that was because it was. They only made it to 27 before they passed out from heat exhaustion and were taken to the infirmary. Theron didn't seem to realize the change in the environment, though. Since this is a spar, shouldn't we have a goal? It hardly seems appropriate to continue until one of us is incapacitated, but there are no arena boundaries here, and Teacher Dulcow hasn't set a goal or achievement to reach either. For the sake of safety, I think we should do this first. Silence fell. There was nothing wrong with Theron's words. They were only natural, in fact, but they all couldn't help but look toward the sergeant nonetheless. After a moment, Dulcow raised a foot and stomped down. There was a rush of mana, and a perfect square appeared around the two, dug right into the ground. A step out is considered a loss, if that's... Sorry, Teacher Dulcow, just one more matter. According to the student handbook, demonstrations such as this one, especially in the case of a teacher requiring a student to risk life and harm, should come with adequate compensation as well. In this case, it's a first year being made to battle against a second, and it should be qualified for the maximal benefits. Theron raised his fingers. 3 military stream credits. Sergeant Dulcow's eyes bulged, smoke billowing from his head. Once again, there was nothing that Theron had said that was wrong. It was inappropriate for a first year to be asked to spar with a second, let alone one from a completely different stream. Dulcow had sent out a second year because it didn't make sense to send out a first year for a demonstration to begin with. He never thought that Byrne would send out a first year. After a long while, the sergeant nodded. No credit for a loss, 1 credit for lasting 3 minutes, 2 credits for landing a significant blow, 3 credits for a victory. Hey, I don't get any credits, Wajan asked. Sergeant Dulcow looked over with a gaze that could kill, and Wajan immediately shut up, not daring to say another word. Is that satisfactory? The sergeant asked. Yes, Theron nodded. Good, on my signal you will begin. Dulcow raised a hand, and everyone seemed to hold their breath. With a flap of his robes, it descended. Wajan opened his arms wide, charging at Theron as though to hug him to death. Theron looked back to the line behind him, and then ahead again. In just the brief instant, Wajan had already crossed over half the distance, his arms bulging as he began to bring them together. The thunderous flood of blood filled the stage, Wajan's vigorous flux mana rushing through his veins. Little Sadie covered her eyes, unable to look. It felt like they were watching a bull rush a toddler, and somehow it was all sanctioned. Theron, though, seemed the calmest of them all. Even now, he was trying to decide whether he should lose or not. Wajan was suddenly no more than 3 meters away, and Theron's eyes did one final sweep, landing on Byrne. The old man's yellow grin was still plastered onto his face. From a third party's perspective, he looked like he was cheering his students on, but Theron could practically feel the oozing sliminess. It seemed that without Teacher Fern here, this was his life now. Dom. Wajan's speed hit its peak just as he reached Theron, his arms smashing together into a strong current. Shrieks came from the academic stream as Theron was swallowed whole. From the vantage point of the majority, all they could see was Wajan's back, while Theron's small frame was enveloped by the enormous second year. However, Wajan felt like he had just hit nothing but air. No, he had hit an odd mist. He hopped on 1 foot, confusion coloring his features as he ground to a stop. The look would have been quite comedic if he wasn't looking around so seriously. Then a strong kick came from his back. He hardly stumbled forward, his body only taking another 2 steps, and only because he was off balance to begin with. With a quick spin, he turned to meet his enemy, but Theron was already pointing down at the ground in front of him. As if I would fall for that, Wajan growled, gearing up to attack again. You're out of bounds. I would advise you not to attack, otherwise you could earn yourself a credit demerit. Wajan froze. After saying his piece, Theron calmly walked to the side, the last bits of mist in the air being sucked into his water bottle as he took a refreshing sip. Of course, he had no need for this water bottle to cast Touch of Mirage. His Water Mancer might be weak in resonance, but his control was at a level these people couldn't fathom. Still, they didn't need to know that. Chapter 24, finally. Theron walked back to the group of academics and took his spot. Little Sadie looked like she was about to jump out of her shoes, her pigtails bouncing. Luckily, she was aware enough of the situation they were in to not make much of a sound. No one but the Gold Mancers and upper years seemed to quite understand what happened. Theron's usage of Touch of Mirage had clearly touched the adept boundary already. To cast a Water Mancer movement technique in such a heated atmosphere, without much room or time to work with well, it spoke for itself. Was it just a trick? You could argue that. In fact, it would be hard to refute. But when it came to battles, there was no such thing as fairness. Wajan stood in embarrassment, still not quite believing that he had lost just like that. He didn't even get the chance to display his abilities. The sound of a slow clapping echoed. Everyone looked over to find Teacher Burn Thistle happily bringing his hands together, balancing his cane against his body. A wonderful display, truly. You've done us proud, Theron. 3 credits well earned. I think this might be some sort of record. A first year, not even halfway through the year, with 18 credits already. Several eyes landed on Theron. Thank you for your praise, Teacher Thistle. Theron lowered his head in acknowledgement. It is not as impressive as it sounds. My teachers have given me great opportunities. A humble child, indeed. Many can learn from you. As you've seen, everyone, brute strength isn't everything in combat. As much as our academic stream will learn from the military stream, so too will the military stream learn from us. A sculptor cannot do their work without both a hammer and chisel. The finer points, the greater details, they cannot be carved out without a hand both sturdy and strong, and delicate and gentle. The two work together in tandem, and what we want you all to understand as the future backbone of the Empire is that you need both. Teacher Burn looked around with a smile. That said, the point of our exchange is to learn from the other side. As such, doing things our way would defeat the purpose. As clever as little Theron is, and as impressive as his win was, it is not in the spirit of our trip today. Of the 11 credits you all must earn, they must come from classes that match this spirit. As such, for students of the academic stream, your 11 credits must come through combat. Teacher Burns swept a gaze over Theron, and you will be assessed with a special grading system. Theron has rightfully earned 3 credits this time, but should he attempt to pass another class in this way, he will receive a failing mark. The nervousness of the class began to steadily increase. It seemed that their dreams of taking non-combative classes to meet the new requirements were being dashed before their eyes. There's no need to feel so down. This is an Imperial Academy, after all. You all are here to learn, so learn you will. Your weaknesses, it is the job of us teachers to help you to fill them. Today will be just the first day. Twice a week, we will join the military stream, and twice a week they will join us. The remaining day, of course not including the weekend, will be spent individually. Teacher Burn clapped his hands together once more. Now I leave it up to you, Sergeant Dulcow. Whip these academics into shape for me. I only have one request. Every session should end in a spar. What is the military stream if not a place to learn combat? The old man's laughter made it hard to hate him, and there was little to pick out of his words, if anything at all. Theron watched these proceedings in silence, trying to gain an inkling about what was really going on here. But no matter how he turned it over in his mind, something wasn't adding up. The only thing that made sense for now was that someone was playing a very, very long con. But could they get away with keeping the disciples of the sects away from their headquarters for so long? The movements pointed to this matter being acute, but there were many actions that directly contradicted that at the same time. Ah, right. I'm so old and muddle-headed that I almost forgot. In a month from now, the luminescent moon sect will arrive for an exchange as well. If some of you show talent substantial enough, maybe you can leave the world of military and politics to enter the world of cultivation. Warning signs blared in Theron's mind. A dog whistle. Until now, the words that Teacher Burn had spoken were nothing short of perfect. There was nothing to pick at. However, if a member of the Imperial clan was here right now, those words alone were enough to have him beheaded on the spot. To speak of the sects as though they were somehow superior to the crown, and the path the latter could provide was worse than a taboo. It was punishable by death if the right person heard you. Theron's senses subtly spread out, and as expected, they were too young. No one seemed to pick up on the blasphemy in Teacher Burns' words. They had sounded innocent enough, and most of the academics who would have been more prone to picking up on it were so nervous about the idea of real combat that it had gone in through one ear and out through the other. Finally, Theron understood what was going on here. Maybe there was some secret realm waiting to be entered, but even if there was, it wasn't what was most important here. This was a rebellion, and he was caught right in the middle of a struggle against the crown. Theron felt that very same crooked, toothy grin barring to the depths of his soul. Chapter 25, The Moon at Dusk. Theron returned to his abode. The fatigue that had been on his brows moments before vanished, leaving him breathing evenly, as though he hadn't just gone through a rigorous workout. They had really put them through the paces, but compared to his training as an assassin, it was little more than a joke. Right now, he had more pressing matters to deal with. How should he handle the next few years? Should he transfer Imperial academies? But how would he handle the Assassin's Guild situation if he did so? Should he even bother still killing Yanoi considering the danger? He had originally only wanted to use this as a method to relieve himself of some pressure and gather more information. What he didn't expect was for Teacher Byrne to have such a mask-off moment today. Of course, it was incredibly subtle, and most didn't even understand what they had heard. But the fact Theron understood was enough. Spirit Mancers were incredibly sensitive to the changes in others' emotions. Theron might be good at hiding his intentions, but there was a reason Byrne kept looking at him. His control wasn't to the point where he could hide from a Gold Mancer. Byrne could all but read his mind like an open book. It wasn't that exaggerated, but there was no doubt that Byrne would keep an eye on him whenever he could manage it. Is it my fault? The thought came out of nowhere, but Theron was finding it hard to believe that it was a coincidence. The death of Merchant Greycoat obviously had many implications and strings attached to it that he wasn't aware of before. And now, all of these dominoes were falling one after another. This time, it was little more than intuition, but he was being tugged in that direction nonetheless. There was also a reason the mission to kill Yanoi had been at the guild. The same reason Merchant Greycoat's mission kept popping up despite the fact there was a tacit agreement to not complete it. He had been caught in the middle of the storm before he even understood that he was in danger to begin with. If that's the case, then there's only one course of action to take. Theron looked to the blank gray walls around him. With a smooth motion, he picked up the short sword and dagger sheathed to the wall. It was time for his training. Tonight he would kill. He had taken Malaya out on a Friday. Since then, a weekend had passed. Today was a Monday. According to the mission requirements, the best time to kill Yanoi was a Friday while he was inebriated at the Purple Scale Tea House. So, of course, he would kill him on a Tuesday. That night, Theron left the academy with slow strides. By the gates, a fidgeting Malaya was waiting for him. Somehow this time, she was even more nervous than before. Theron hadn't even called out to her before sunset this time. She could practically already see the sliver of the moon above them. Was it really all right for them to be going out so late, especially in the middle of the week like this? But she just couldn't say no. Last time, after Theron spent so long in the bathroom, he admitted that he had gotten very nervous and had some trouble. After he was so open with her, Malaya, forever the people-pleaser, didn't want to be the reason his day was ruined. Now, she stupidly found herself agreeing to yet another date when she knew that she should have said no. They had wasted an entire day in the training field, so there hadn't been any chance to study like she usually would. She should definitely be in the library right now, but here she was. "I'm happy you came," Theron said with a smile. The words Malaya wanted to say were caught in her throat. For some reason, Theron seemed larger tonight. He was still wearing his Imperial scholar garb, a beautiful sweeping combination of white, violet, and gold. But it had none of the signs of wear and tear from the earlier hardship. None of them had gotten a chance to change on the field today. She had no idea when Theron had the time to clean his uniform. The thought of him having more than one crossed her mind, but even the academy only ever issued one for the purpose of discipline. Before she could gather her thoughts, her head went blank. Theron took her hand and led her away. Malaya felt as though her head might implode. Steam practically rose out of her hair and ears, her collarbone going so red it looked purple beneath the dark hues of dusk. Her tongue was entirely tied, and she barely registered when Theron spoke again. "2 tickets to the show, please." "Yes, of course, young noble." Theron led Malaya into a theater, and they took their seats as the lights dimmed. The stage ahead shuddered as the curtains shifted. Soon, the night's host had appeared. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a great show prepared for you all tonight." Theron had long let go of Malaya's hand, but all she could seem to focus on was the warmth that had just been there. Half the show had gone by before she finally snapped away, and that was only because Theron whispered into her ear. The warmth of his breath sent a jolt of electricity down her spine, and she almost fainted again. "I'll be back. I'll try to get us some snacks on the way back." Malaya nodded absent-mindedly, gripping onto her dress tightly as Theron shifted past her. How the hell had this ended up happening to her again? What she didn't know was that the boy who left her flustered had completely changed the moment he left the theater. Slinking off into the night, the cold blue of Theron's eyes left streaks in the darkness. Today there was no rain. That was unfortunate. He'd just have to make his own. Chapter 26, Gray Rhino. "Fuck me, I should be in bed right now," Soren grumbled. "Shut up," Tegan and Thessa replied at the same time in a hushed hiss, and Soren slapped a palm over his mouth. The 3 sect members stalked through the woods. They probably thought they were doing quite well moving in stealth, but a pair of blue eyes in the distance told a completely different story. Theron stood high in the trees, unmoving. This location was near the outskirts of the city, though near was subjective. At an all-out sprint, it took Theron 15 minutes to get here, yet he somehow landed on the exact group he was looking for. It was hard to tell what he was thinking, following after Sadie's friends like this, but he did so without complaint, even as the first half hour passed by ever so slowly. "Here," Thessa said softly. The group stopped by a stream hidden behind some shrubbery. One after another, they unsheathed their weapons. There was a rumble, and the ground seemed to sway. A shadow flickered beneath the crescent moonlight, a towering mass of a beast slowly inching forward. A gray rhino. Even in the night, Theron picked it out before they did. It was a hulking mass of a creature that had no business walking on such soft soil. Every step it took to press the ground what felt like half a foot, and in the depths of the night, half asleep, it swayed back and forth as it made its way to take a sip of water. Nothing about any of this made sense. A trio of sect members coming here as though they knew the gray rhino would be awake. A beast stumbling for water as though a human feeling their way back to bed from the bathroom in the middle of the night. And then there was the oddest part of it all. Theron himself. The youth had a calmness to him even in this odd situation. Somehow, it felt like everything was according to his plan. The trio burst forward, even Soren showing rare hints of seriousness. Their swords flashed into existence, and it was surprisingly Thessa that took the vanguard among them. Her robes wrapped around her under the moon, glimpses of her silhouette playing to the sparkling tail of her blade crossing the cool night air. She clashed with the gray rhino's horn and grasped its attention, her footsteps light as she pierced at its eyes again and again. The gray rhino was quickly irritated and charged after her, its fatigue vanishing as it realized it was being targeted by puny humans. Its Mancy level wasn't very high, maybe just at the 6th resonance or so, but its defenses alone were comparable to that of a 9th resonance Flux Mancer. Thessa clearly knew this, as she didn't even really make an attempt to stab through the gray rhino's eyes, simply feinting at it again and again. In just a few exchanges, Thessa successfully lured the gray rhino into the shallow depths of the stream, and its already clunky movement became even more so. By comparison, Thessa's feet tapped at the water, leaving ripples as her mana glided her across the surface with ease. Tegan and Soren rounded the creature's back, pouncing on it the instant it took another lunge at Thessa. The back hide of the gray rhino was especially tough, and the two clearly knew this. Watching from above, Theron felt like he understood their plan and couldn't help but shake his head. Tegan and Soren both pierced their swords at the gray rhino's legs, aiming for the back of its knees simultaneously. A howl came from the creature as its skin was just barely torn through. It had been so focused on Thessa that it didn't expect such a sudden change. There was a flash in Thessa's gaze, and she knew this was her chance. Her retreat stopped, and she pressed her whole foot onto the surface of the water. "Ta." She shot forward, a silvery glow coating her blade. She's close to Silver Mancy, Theron thought to himself. Very close, just not close enough. Puchi. Thessa's blade tore through the gray rhino's eye, half a foot of its edge sinking into its socket. Blood dyed the air for a brief moment as the gray rhino screamed out in pain. Thessa's eyes opened wide as she realized something was wrong. Her blade didn't go in nearly deep enough, and now it was stuck. She made a quick decision, hurriedly retreating and abandoning her blade. Wrong decision, Theron calmly analyzed. The gray rhino bucked. By now, Tegan and Soren had both retreated away from the range of its fury, slipping out and extending the distance. They thought Thessa would end it, but when their vision was obscured by the sudden rise of the water, they knew that something had gone wrong. The gray rhino howled and charged after Thessa. Thessa found herself flustered, and her mana control faltered. Her foot slipped into the water for a moment, and though she managed to restabilize herself quickly enough, the gray rhino was upon her, its horn lowered to skewer her right through the abdomen. Without a choice, Thessa could only send out a palm strike, her mana churning into a flaming palm. If she had such a strong offensive mana affinity, why didn't she use it before? Theron questioned. Thessa had been insistent on using the luminescent moon, sect's martial arts for some reason, ignoring her fire mancy. Theron didn't have an answer, so he simply calmly slotted it away. Thessa's flaming palm obscured the vision of the gray rhino's one good eye, and she rounded to its side, grabbing the hilt of the sword she left in its other. Her mana erupted, and the blade became a searing hot iron. Before the gray rhino could react, the sword was buried another half-foot into its skull. This time it froze. The forward momentum of the beast sent Thessa flailing, the horn ripping a deep gash along her side before sending her sprawling into the waters. The currents of the stream swallowed her up. "They're coming," Theron thought to himself. Rather than tensing, his body became frighteningly relaxed. If one analyzed him now, he would look no different from a young man in a deep slumber. Except for the sharpness of his eyes. Chapter 27, Thorny Fields. "Thessa, are you okay? Thessa?" Tegan and Soren both rushed Thessa out of the water, their panic evident as their palms quickly became coated in blood. Pushing down the anxiousness in their hearts, they hurried to bring her to the shore, almost forgetting about their mission. Even now, none of the three understood why they were given a sudden mission in the dead of night like this. But they were told before they left the sect that this was a training exercise for the real world. They had no right to refuse. In times of war, missions came at all hours of the day, and they had to be ready for them no matter what. "Thessa, wake up." "The first aid kit, you idiot." Tegan rarely lost his cool, but watching Soren yell at Thessa as though that was going to fix something was really starting to vex him. Soren had a million quippy replies to that, but he eventually decided that Tegan was actually in the right. "Damn it, what do? We can't take off her clothes, right? She'll kill us." "Who said anything about taking off her clothes? Just give me the first aid kit." Tegan pushed the idiot out of the way. "Hold her up, the wound is on her side. We just need to clean it up and stitch it together. That should keep her upright for long enough to get back to the city." "All right." Soren rushed out a bottle of water and poured it across Thessa's gaping wound. They cleaned up the wound as best they could, but the blood made it a continuous struggle. Luckily, the sect had their own classes, and first aid like this was among the first. They might have been flustered, but they half knew what they were doing. Soon, they were patching her up with the on-the-go stitches they had. They were basically glorified bandages that squeezed folds of skin together. However, they didn't expect that the moment they stood up, they would hear clapping. "Not bad, not bad. I mean, it is kind of pathetic to almost die to a feral beast, but I guess you can't expect much from outer sect disciples anyway." The voice was muffled and hard to make out, but the insults in it were clear. The expressions of Tegan and Soren changed. They hurried to stand, pulling out their swords once again and focusing on the direction of the sound, only to realize they weren't sure exactly where it came from. Feral beasts were unranked creatures. They weren't considered true mancy beasts, and by extension, they often had simple colloquial names. All things considered, gray rhinos were among the toughest of them to deal with, but they were still nothing special. Tegan and Soren were already feeling quite horrible that they didn't do enough to distract the gray rhino, and this person's words were just like salt in their open wounds. No need to look. With your skill, you'll never find me. I can give you a choice, though. Obediently put down the girl and scurry off. If you're fast enough, you just might be able to live. Or I guess you can fight and die here along with her. That works too. The two tensed. Just what was going on here? They both looked at each other, and then at Thessa. There was a storminess in their eyes as though they grasped an inkling. It seemed that they had truly gotten themselves caught in a mess this time. No, well, I'm not a patient person. I'll give you 3 seconds, 2. The timer started, and the two reacted at the same time. Soren took Thessa and dashed to the right. Tegan released her and dashed to the left. They had hardly made it very far when both of them tripped. No matter how clumsy they were, with their cultivation, it was impossible for the two of them to make such a mistake at the same time. They both looked down at their ankles, and their eyes filled with despair. Ah, it seems you've figured it out. This is a little bit of a shame. I don't know what I should do about that, except to kill all 3 of you. What can I say? It's out of my hands. Crack. The wooden branches wrapped around the legs of the duo squeezed down, shattering their ankles. They yelped in pain, trying to hold back their cries but failing to do so in the end. The feeling of having your bones give way beneath pressure was worse than words could describe, and it was only made worse by the shards of your own skeleton digging into the soft bits of your body. Deep in the forest, Yanoi stood with a sinister glint in his eye, so focused he almost didn't notice a streak of blue appear at his back. Almost. Theron's short sword and dagger glinted in the night, slashing out at the back of Yanoi's neck. He had no intention of acting for the sake of saving those 3, but for the next steps of his plan to work, he needed them to live. He didn't expect to get caught in a political game so quickly, but since this was the dance they were going to have, he was going to have to show the world who Theron Gallithunder was far earlier than he wanted. Yanoi's reaction, though, was even faster than Theron expected. A shield of wood appeared at his back, and before Theron's blades could take his head, they ran into a solid wall of wiggling vines first. The defenses felt both solid and flexible at the same time, half like he had just sunk his blade into a net of roots, and half like he had just smashed against a wooden board. Theron's reactions were quick as well as he slipped away, dodging the shifting roots in the ground. If you can find a way to limit or eliminate thorny fields entirely, using a speed advantage to win should not be a problem. Those were the recommendations of the mission, but Theron had stepped directly into an arena Yanoi had long prepared. This entire bank was his domain. This entire bank was thorny fields. Roots shot up from the ground, assaulting Theron from all sides. And yet, those steely blue eyes glittered in the dark with the calmness of a killer. Chapter 28, Water. Theron's blades glided through the night air. He sidestepped and parried, his head shifting as sharp roots passed over his shoulder. Every time he tapped a foot, he seemed to land in an unmoved location, his calculations precise and sharp. It was clear that he was moving much slower than the roots were, but somehow he reacted first. The moisture content in this region, by the stream, was high. He could feel the changes to the ground hardly a moment after Yanoi had the intention to launch a sneak attack. There was also a very clear weakness to this form of combat, if Yanoi was too eager. Theron ducked beneath a net of roots, and the series of vines suddenly tugged against one another, caught in a knot of their own making. With another tap of his foot, Theron actually expanded the distance between himself and Yanoi. He wasn't a fool. He was only in the 4th resonance, while Yanoi wasn't just in the 9th, but he was also exceptionally powerful within his resonance. If not, he wouldn't have been able to take out a pair of 8th resonances like Soren and Tegan with such ease, preparation or not. Yanoi was also a bit taken aback. He had never seen anyone deal with his thorny fields, skills so easily. The fact that he didn't know who Theron was only made him more apprehensive. This caused him to hesitate a beat, allowing Theron to expand the distance even further and slip closer to the shore. Maybe it was the sway of water, or the way the silvery line beamed through the foliage, but Yanoi finally snapped awake. No matter what, he had to kill this man quickly. Soren and Tegan had already noticed that there was a change to the situation and had slipped out of the vines that entrapped them. Although they were heavily injured, they were still cultivators, and Yanoi wasn't exactly a tracking expert. He had found them so easily this time because he knew where they would be. If he allowed them to slip too far away, it might ruin everything, and then he wouldn't have another chance come so easily. The fact that Theron was here in the first place already made him very apprehensive. It felt like someone had seen through their plans, and if that was the case, it was even more important that he tighten up. A flare of mana came from Yanoi's Danshin. The ground flexed beneath his feet, and he was launched forward by a whipping line of vines. His legs extended from the ground, roots wrapping around his calves and making him look far taller and more imposing. Thistled bark activated on his lower extremities, and he kicked out toward Theron. The range must have increased by at least an extra 2 meters, and there was nowhere for Theron to go but the water to his back. When had he ever feared water, though? Theron took that light step, his blades crossing in front of him as he arched his back. A reverberating impact shook his arms, and he clenched his jaw to not make a sound. Telling the cultivation of someone wasn't an exact science, especially when that person had as much mana control as Theron did. Right now, it was supremely important to him that Yanoi didn't know his exact cultivation level. So he suffered in silence, feeling the power nearly render his arms useless as he glided backward. His back hit the waters, and Yanoi pressed his advantage. 10 out of 10 times, this would mean that the battle was over. It was possible to fight on the water, but it required deft control, and a single slip-up could mean the end. Walking on water was easy enough, but coating one's back in a controlled enough stream of mana to not fall into the water and lose all semblance of control was something even most Silver Mancers couldn't do. Theron didn't even try. The splash of water echoed, and he was quickly submerged. Yanoi took a heavy step toward the waters, vines wrapping around his arms as he cocked them back. Quickly, he became a meter taller than usual, his legs and arms wrapped in thick vines. Thistled bark was supposed to be a defensive technique. But who said that it could only be used in that way? When you were a genius like Yanoi, the methods of use for a technique were kind suggestions. This was what it meant to be at the adept boundary. Yanoi roared, launching his arms forward in a cascade of twisting vines that pierced out at the water. He covered a large area, and with how shallow the stream was, especially so near the shore, there was nowhere for Theron to escape to. That said, Yanoi was also a veteran of battle. It wasn't lost on him that he had yet to understand what mancy path his opponent followed. Though Theron felt a lot like a Flux Mancer with his agility, it was difficult to tell until he sensed his mana. So Yanoi's backup plan was also in full effect. The roots dug into the soft soil of the moistened shore. A water bullet suddenly flew at the thistle's head. Fast, sharp, curving through the lines of vines with such expert precision, Yanoi almost missed it. Danger warning signs flared in his head. Bang! Yanoi's head snapped to the side, the muscles in his neck straining on impact. Water. Yanoi was processing things as fast as he could, but he didn't have the time to register why it was a point-blank hit like that only stung instead of taking his head off his shoulders. But it was hard to think straight when your vision was suddenly swimming. What Yanoi didn't realize until it was too late was that this wasn't because he had a concussion. It was because a large wall of mist had appeared around him the moment he slammed into the water with the full force of his wooden vines. Shing. The sharp echo of a blade was the last thing Yanoi heard before his head flew into the air. Chapter 29. It's okay. Theron landed on the ground lightly, his blue eyes frighteningly cold in the depths of the night. He looked down at his hand, a searing pain creeping up his spine. The sword he was holding now wasn't his at all. It was Thessa's. The strength he would need to employ to cut off the head of a ninth resonance, Bronze Mancer, would definitely expose the fact it was a Water Mancer that acted here, and he couldn't afford that. Luckily for him, Thessa had poured a large amount of fire mana into her blade to deal with the gray rhino. Unluckily for him, he was suffering severe burns to his hand now. Hiding this until it healed would be a problem. Theron quickly moved to the stream and began to use Water Mancer to pull the heat out of his hand. Dealing with ninth resonance fire mana, even with a type advantage, was extraordinarily difficult, but he had also come prepared for this. Once he was finished, he began to clean up the battlefield. It was only after he was satisfied that he turned to leave. Tonight seemed simple, but it was all a matter of preparation. As for where it stemmed from, it was a result of a simple slip-up on little Sadie's part. When Theron first met Thessa and the others, Sadie had tried to introduce Thessa, only to be cut off by the young woman. But Theron had heard more than enough. Back then, little Sadie had tried to introduce Thessa as her brothers, something. Theron never learned exactly what that was, but it wasn't hard to guess. What was more interesting was why Thessa wouldn't want others to know. Obviously, her relationship with the family wasn't bad. Otherwise, she wouldn't be hanging out with her little sister-in-law to be in her free time. She had no obligation to do so, and if she wasn't a fan of the coming marriage, spending time with her family to be would be at the bottom of her priority list. Then there was the next oddity. Thessa was a half-step into Silver Mancy already. Theron had already sensed this before tonight, and her actions tonight only further proved that. So, why was she in a team with two weaklings like Soren and Tegan? Theron prided himself on knowing information about practically everyone he interacted with, but he knew absolutely nothing about Sadie's family. If he could figure out so much about so many people, and yet be stonewalled by this quite frankly naive little girl with loose lips, it only meant one of two things. Either her family was supremely powerful or supremely secretive. Such a family had to be at the Marquisate level at the worst, or involved in an organization like Daggers of the Night. Though Theron didn't outright dismiss the latter, often the simplest answer was the correct one. In which case, if there was a power struggle ongoing, and suddenly a high-priority target hiding their identity and true abilities appeared, what would the result be? Theron made a guess, and he was correct. Taking out Thessa was indeed one of the goals of the Thistles, and today they had failed. Of course, there was a lot of reconnaissance involved in this. These last few days, Theron had done what he did best and gathered a lot of information on his own. Though he had to admit that with an ally like little Sadie, it was all too easy. This was more than just a blessing in disguise for Theron. In fact, he had no plans on handing in this mission to Daggers of the Night. The looming danger that was the secrets intertwining Merchant Greycoat were still hanging over his head. How could he so easily get himself involved again? The good news was that since Yanoi died, he shouldn't suffer a penalty from the organization for failure. Now, he could sit back and watch what sort of clashes happened between two powerhouse clans. The Dean is Yanoi's father. Let's see how he reacts. Theron slipped back into the theater as though nothing at all had happened. The gloves he was wearing earlier had slipped back onto his hands seamlessly, covering his burns. He came back to find that Malaya was half asleep. He had purposely chosen a long-running play. Usually, it was a 2-day one, but it was cheaper on the weekdays and crammed into a single sitting as a result. In Theron's opinion, it should probably be more expensive because of that and the pressure it put on the performers. But fairness wasn't something the world was known for. In the end, he had to shake Malaya awake when the play ended. The poor girl was a bit embarrassed as she wiped her drool away, blushing profusely and apologizing even more so for wasting Theron's money. Theron only smiled lightly and said that it was fine. It was his fault for picking such a late show anyway. Theron, Malaya fidgeted, not knowing what to do with herself. She had resolved herself to say the words this time, but after falling asleep, she felt bad doing so. It's okay, Theron said with a smile. I know you don't like me very much. I'm just happy you gave me these 2 dates. I'll remember them. I hope you can find your happiness elsewhere. Malaya froze. We're here, Theron said softly. You have a nice night, Malaya. I won't bother you anymore. With that, Theron walked off, vanishing around the corner in a few steps after leaving Malaya to the girls' dorms. Malaya didn't know why, but she felt herself trembling as Theron disappeared. She wanted to say 1,000,000 times that that wasn't what she meant, but it was already much too late now. Tears fell from her eyes, gliding down her cheeks. Theron rounded the corner, the calmness in his eyes belying the letdown he had just experienced. I need to break into the 5th resonance as quickly as possible. My cultivation is too slow. As he vanished into the night, a storm was brewing. Soon, news that the son of the newly appointed dean was dead would spread far and wide. Chapter 30, Odd Jade. Theron returned to his home, pulling out a pouch. Unlike with Merchant Greycoat, Theron had no choice but to take the risk and snatch everything of value from Yanoai's body. While it was a risk, it was more worthwhile. First, he had someone to blame it on. Second, the items were much lesser, so he could actually store them all. Of course, it also helped that Yanoai had a spatial pouch on him. Theron wasn't in a hurry to unseal the pouch. He was well read enough to know that anyone wealthy enough to have such a pouch would also protect it well. It was also possible that it had several tracking methods on it, set to trigger when the wrong person tried to open it. If Yanoai was a Soul Mancer, Theron wouldn't even try this. But since he was a Wood Mancer, Theron was quite confident. Wood Mancers were rare variants, falling outside the usual common Elemental Mancers of fire, water, earth, and wind. They fell between water and earth, and because of that, wood mana could be partially controlled by Theron. He wasn't very good at it, but he didn't need to be. He needed just enough to nudge the pouch in the right direction. There was no way he would use this pouch after today, so all he needed to do was open it. After analyzing the pouch for a while, Theron confirmed his speculations and closed his eyes, taking a seat in meditation. He exhaled a slow breath and began to pull on the strands of mana protecting the pouch. For as long as Theron could remember, he had a fascination with increasing his mana control. He had never been enamored with combat, but doing menial tasks with his Water Mancer had been his childhood guilty pleasure. At some unknown point, he had become so good at it that even without being at the 1st resonance, his control was better than even most Silver Mancers that had already awakened their 3rd eye. Being able to control a branching mana like this was a telltale sign of excellent control. Lightning, for example, was known to be close to fire and wind, though more so to fire. It was rare, but possible, for Fire Mancers to gain secondary Lightning Mancy abilities as they grew into Gold Mancy and beyond. However, doing something like this in Bronze Mancy, especially at the mere 4th resonance, was unheard of. Granted, Theron was only controlling already existing wood mana and not manifesting it, but it would be enough to draw countless breaths of shock nonetheless. There was a shift in the pouch, and Theron's eyes snapped open. He flipped the pouch over and poured out its contents quickly before allowing it to naturally snap shut as though a rubber band. He knew that he didn't have much time, and he didn't want to force the pouch to stay open. So the best he could hope for was that there wasn't anything too fragile inside. Out tumbled 3 pill bottles, a booklet, and what looked like a wooden tablet. Without a 3rd eye, Theron couldn't confirm if there was anything else in the pouch, but even if he had 3rd eye, he wouldn't dare take the risk. He had made use of residual wood mana Yanoai had left behind, but it had been mostly used up now. Trying again would be playing with fire. High-tier bronze resonance pills, a silver resonance breakthrough pill, and... Theron paused on the third bottle, not recognizing it immediately. The first two were about what he would expect. Despite the sheer value of the pills, he was quite calm when coming across them. But this last one... I see, this should be an echo pill, though I'm not sure of the quality. It shouldn't be too bad considering Yanoai's standing. An echo. It was the dream of many, and yet Theron's reaction was still quite muted. Upon reaching Silver Mancy, one's core would not only become more refined, but it would likewise gain new abilities. At this point, some geniuses would be able to gain an echo. Echoes came from beasts above the feral stage, true Mancer beasts. Of course, there were many stages of Mancy beasts as well, and depending on the grade of the creature, the echo pill necessary to integrate it would likewise be more substantial. Theron had once read an ancient script that told of cultivators of an ancient past that were capable of integrating echoes through special techniques or their sheer talent. But these days, scholars believed that these methods were primitive and came with too high a risk. Unfortunately, Theron didn't have the experience to guess at what level of integration Yanoai was aiming for. And unlike the other pills here, the fact there was an echo pill was more odd than not. This was because more would only dare to attempt to integrate an echo when their foundation was stable. The most common choice was the third silver resonance. It was either Yanoai was overconfident, his family had too much money to waste, or he was more of a genius than Theron had given him credit for. There is a fourth possibility. Theron looked at the pill bottle. It was a lot different from the others. It definitely came from a different source. The material, this jade pattern hasn't been common in several hundred years. There was a flicker in Theron's eyes as he grabbed at the wooden tablet that had clanked to the ground. The back was smooth and unblemished, but on the other side, there were engravings he could feel with his fingers but not see with his eyes. Theron raised the piece of wood up to his nose and sniffed. Then, he turned to the jade bottle and sniffed once more. Indeed, they come from the same source. Yanoai likely picked this echo pill up from an unexpected source. Theron spun the tablet on his finger. While it looked very much like wood, there was a reason he said it came from the same source. Suddenly, he flicked out his finger, and the tablet shattered to pieces. Shards flew in all directions, but Theron hardly spared them a glance as he snatched out at the carnage. Slowly, he opened his palm, a familiar-looking piece of jade reflecting back up at him.